and weigh in on the camera.
Oh, sorry.
Oh no, I lost my spot. Where'd it go? All right. Welcome to RFO John, Range Fitness Online. I'm John. He's Paul. Tonight we're actually going to start off the show looking at and checking out an NBA injury. I believe his name's Halliburton's ankle injury. But tonight's stream really is going to be about ankles as much as it's going to be about shoulders. However, there is a interplay of a non-contact injury and how it relates to shoulders. So beyond just rest, just true recovery means smart rehab. So join us as we follow or study or look into effective strategies to build shoulder strength, resilience for athletes, and just anybody out there who may be looking for shoulder recovery. How you doing tonight, Sir Paul?
Doing well, John. Thank you. How are you doing?
Choppy. That was a little choppy to land in there, wasn't it?
I thought it was great. And straight to jail for anyone who thinks otherwise.
Right. How's Mr. Skinny doing back there over your left shoulder?
Mr. Skinny doing really well.
He's looking very,
just chilling.
Very pretentious, I guess, over there with it.
Yeah, like very judgy statement there in the back, right? Got the legs crossed and all that other business.
A little mood lighting.
What's that? A
little mood lighting.
Yeah, it's like high judgment lighting is what I think of that as, right? Like that kind of cast from the light over there. And in contrast, I feel like the kind of orangish red that goes into this like neutral territory right here, right? You have the blue, and you got Mr. Smiley over here. So
a little yin and yang action.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
What you were saying about the NBA guy. So oftentimes, something I wanted to talk about, I wanted to make sure that we addressed, and I feel like we do a good job of it, but something that really bears never-ending repetition is how we behave in one thing is quite often reflective of how we behave in many things. So even though the clip we're going to look at in a minute deals with this NBA player with a seemingly unrelated injury, some of the backstory that you're going to reveal in a second really highlights how we handle a lot of stuff, right? So let
me get it queued up here.
Sure.
Get that shared up. Make that full screen. So if you follow a sports ball, right, there was a big competition the other night, and it was Game 7 of the NBA Finals. So it was for all the tuna fish. And this was, I guess, in the first quarter, early on in the game. And let me get in the right screen. We hit play here. So if you've seen the injury, you know what to look for, kind of a thing. But it is a sneaky or kind of innocuous in some ways, I feel. So we don't need to watch them. We'll replay it again. And right there, you see his ankle roll to the inside to his center, and that kind of weird snap of his foot. And then the sudden loss, when you see him stumble, I've seen this happen for track athletes running a 200 or something. They were taking the corner and their knee blew out and they just looks like someone shoots them and they fall. You just have that all of a sudden loss of control of your joint or your limb, and that pain. Good God. Could only imagine.
Yeah.
I can only imagine for this guy, the pain of the ankle. And I was reading earlier, he was playing through a calf strain. And this is one of those things where I always tell clients, like, you don't push through pain during workouts, because this is the kind of a thing that'll happen is you'll end up blowing out a tendon or hurting a joint tremendously. Now, this is Game 7, NBA playoffs. This is the pinnacle maybe of this guy's career. I don't fault him for doing this. I'd probably be a knucklehead and be like, put me in too, coach. Like
that's the nature of competition, though, right? Like
take him out on a shield. I mean, that was a hell of.
Take him out on a shield. Yeah. Yeah.
If this was like, first round playoffs, let's have a conversation. First week, last week, playoff push. have a conversation. Game 7, finals. God bless you, man. Get the surgeons on standby because
Yeah, I'll.
what do you have to add, sir? How do you?
I'll concede that right there. Pause. So let's take a look at for just a second the angle on what I'm presuming is the right leg, if this is all things accurate with regard to mirror imaging and whatever.
I believe it was his right leg that he injured. So
yeah. So if we look at this angle, right, and how acute that is on the right leg, and then let's look at this other person over here and how obtuse that angle is, and how obtuse this angle is, right? And what I'm talking about with regard to the angle is the relationship between the lower leg and the top of the foot, whatever angle that presents. Even here on this guy's, on the injured player, Halliburton, on his stepping leg, you can see here how that angle is more obtuse than on the extended leg. Not to mention, well, let's talk about instead of not to mention, let's talk about what produced that. That knee locked, right? Which sent that ankle as far down to the ground as it could possibly go. Which, when you have the rest of the foot that's on the floor, something's got to give, and it's not going to be the earth. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, the earth stops 100% of the things that fall into it. At least the things that originate on this planet.
You know what you're reminding me of while you're discussing this?
What's that? Who?
A cueing I give to clients.
Oh, let's hear it.
But it's for lunges. So this is a lunge in my eye. And you're talking about the heel being down to the ground. Putting people in a lunge, they know the idea of one leg forward, one leg back. Many times I see clients try to hit that back heel to the floor. Like, I can't. I just feel this terrible pain in my Achilles. So I look at them and go, well, stop doing it. But
yeah,
the simple cue, though, is to just bring your heel above your toes. Bend at the knee to allow that to happen, and then you can build out from there. Right, because that's going to put some nice length into the bottom of the foot as well, if we're looking at like the whole system. Whereas if we're having brevity in the calf and the quad, those are going to be pretty challenging to begin with as it is. And then if you're really just forcing the hell out of it, like this guy did for a sprint, on already, we'll call it an abbreviated or hyperactive calf, that, a calf that's reluctant to quickly go through contractions. You're going to, that sudden shear load it's going somewhere.
So something else that we should call to mind here is that, just like with every other performative muscle that, or voluntary motion related muscle, that is a muscle that you use as a result of your will, your expression of the leg has a look. He can't even, like as soon as he tries to put any weight on that leg, it just falls, right? I'm surprised that we didn't see, I don't know if this was a total tear, because we didn't see any kind of bunching up by the knee.
That leg spandex keeps everything in place, man.
Yeah, I guess so. And it seemed like there was some snapback. Just no load.
Like, if it was complete, I would expect, again, this is pure speculation, but if there was no connection here at the Achilles region, right, it'd be very, I think, again, more obvious that foot would be pulling up towards the knee. And to your point, like if you see someone tear a pec, right, you'll see this giant rolling up of tissue or mass in that muscle belly. And so we don't.
Well, if you look at any kind of
here, but it could be a partial tear.
If you look at any kind of like a deadlift thing, especially with those inverted that staggered or opposing grip, and somebody tears a bicep, you'll see that bunch up. It's not cute.
Yeah.
The thing I want to call to mind, though, is it's not like, I don't want to do any fear mongering here, because it's not like that level of an acute angle expression is unachievable for many people. In a lot of cultures, for instance, where either, like the local culture or just the culture as a whole, like as a, either a communal or like a lifestyle or tradition or history, has people squatting to accomplish whatever, like playing games as kids, or doing laundry, or working with whatever. People have really, really pronounced degrees of acute expression in the angle between the top of the foot and the lower leg. But in all of those populations, you will see a significant factor, which is, pause it right there, which is something that we don't see in a culture or a livelihood where running, for instance, has more importance placed on it than like squatting, which is a pronounced expression or visual representation of this muscle on the front side of the lower leg as opposed to the back side of the lower leg. It's called the anterior tibia, or the tibialis anterior, and it's the muscle that's responsible for flexion of the top of your foot. Now, when you have a really, really well developed anterior tibialis, you have a lot of flexion possible on top of that foot, and that angle can be quite acute. When you have something like that, you'll find someone able to go into a lunge that looks pretty otherworldly with that back leg, right? That heel can sink way back, and the angle between the top of the foot and the lower leg is really narrow. I can guarantee you that this person has far more developed calf strength than they do anterior tibialis strength, and that was a big determining factor.
Go
ahead.
Dog's getting wild. I know he's kind of polarizing for a lot of people, but one of my early introductions into fitness mobility was Dr. Kelly Starrett. And he had an expression that I love, and I steal it all the time, is athletes are the best compensators.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah.
And what he means by that is, athletes have the tremendous ability of being able to make movement compensations despite how inefficient or how unideal it is for the joints per se, as far as a longevity or a wear and tear standpoint. And whether it's the pain gets, the mind breaks out of the pain cycle, so to speak, by being kind of shut down or ignoring the pain, or kind of finding other ways to move around to where you can still create movement and you develop strength within those kind of new altered movement patterns. I mean, I knew people in high school that could run just ridiculously fast, but they had a washer machine run, right? So despite how much effort they were wasting here, they still were able to generate enough force to be faster than anybody else.
So I'd like to, on that note, let's talk about two reasons why compensations develop. And so we're highlighting Achilles tendon injury here. The purpose of our focus tonight is on shoulder injuries, but compensations are compensations. So we're only using this because it's a popularized, in the news recent, kind of event. But with regard to injuries, period, shoulder injuries included, we will find that compensations exist as well. And so the two that I want to talk about, and if you have more, John, please, let's play some volleyball here. But the two that I want to talk about are, number one, an overabundance of one-sided action, such as whenever you are constantly performing the same activity that has only one kind of expression, right? Like there's very little done to train any of the opposing muscles in any way that serve to balance the muscles that you use to commit to that often repeated expression. So let's put it this way. If you are into archery, right? So you're drawing this bow and you have and let's say that even this, and let's say you don't use one of those puller things, right? So if you're into archery and you're pulling back this way, there's a lot of strength given to this expression, but I can almost guarantee you that somebody works on their grip strength a whole bunch, but very, very, very rarely do they do much of this. Pardon me for just a second.
Yep. You know what you're reminding me of here is the longbowmen skeletons that have been found in Britain and the skeletal deformations that have occurred from years of service of being a bowman, as it were, and having to use again that much strength all the time. You can actually, I guess they found you. Hold on. Oh, dogs. I don't know. Twisty Time was chewing on it. You don't need to eat that.
Oh,
what I was saying is, what you reminded me of talking about archery is the skeletal remains they found in Britain of longbowmen, and the way they can use, I guess, the remains to see how their scapulas have actually were deformed and how their spines were deformed and such, and that's how they would identify that they were longbowmen.
Yeah, what their occupation was, right?
And I think even some of their other limbs may have been longer or something of that nature. Like there's some kind of weird stuff that was very unique to that profession or craft, if you will.
Well, yeah. So there's this adherence to what will make you faster doing this one thing, right? Or make you better or stronger or more capable of doing this one thing. And we see that everywhere with a bunch of shit all the time, right? You see a mechanic who turns a wrench or a screwdriver or whatever, really, really pronounced musculature and a really, really profound grip. Or you see someone who spends a lot of time on a keyboard or whatever. We all have it in all walks of life because we perform that activity regularly. Right. Now, the other thing with compensations is, interestingly, the exact opposite, is that we perform an activity so irregularly that the muscles or the muscle groups or agreements required for the execution of that activity aren't strong enough to do it on their own.
Right.
A case in point is one of my favorites because it is really, really common with people who travel a lot, is what I think of as the suitcase lift, right? So starts off with the sky pull with the elbow, right? The elbow comes up, and then this musculature is responsible for like lifting this item up, and then this other hand comes underneath before it gets put in the overhead bin. When there's no reason why someone shouldn't grab it by the sides, pull it up to their chest, and put it in there like this, right? But this action, not only is it incapable of performing a loaded expression, right? Like there's very little
load. Yeah,
there's very little strength available for lifting something up like the elbow first, right? So then a compensation has to happen, right? There's some kind of an assistive measure.
And if people are honest with themselves, that have done that lift, you probably felt some sort of pinchiness, or you may have had a sudden like, oh no, or you suddenly get that other hand involved with, like, you didn't think you were going to need that hand to come in play as soon as you needed it, and that's because you're putting yourself into that kind of jeopardy spot of an impingement or something else. And to your point, if we just trained ourselves to do otherwise, you don't even put yourself in that position.
With our
sports ball
misfortune recipient on the screen here, this person, I'm not saying that their life is spent incorrectly, right? I'm just saying that there's not enough strength developed in specific areas that would have significantly reduced the likelihood of this kind of injury, just like with the shoulder stuff that we'll get into later.
Well, my last thought on it was, this is a game and a profession of it's a lot of hopping, right? It's it reminds me a lot of maybe like a Muay Thai fighter or kickboxing. It's just a lot of bouncing on your calves, again, changing directions. You're not really ever on your heels. You're in this kind of, like you're always wanting to be in this kind of falling forward if you're an offensive player for the most part. And then again, to shoot, you're always going to be some sort of jumping on the balls of the feet. So again, a lot of loading and explosion through the calves. In track, the one thing we used to do is this after warm-ups, we'd always do the little heel walks, right? In ATIB walks, where we'd walk on our heels with our toes up, and we'd do toes up, toes in, toes out. And that was about all we did for shin splints. But it's something that would service this kind of individual. And before this happened, like, and you would really need to probably do some more to really get after it. But if at a minimum, if that was incorporated, that could really go a long ways in prevention of that developing or getting like tender heels or other foot pains.
So let's say that this person spent more time doing exactly those things, right? Even when they're just standing there off court, like these other people dressed all in blue. I don't think they're, probably just a few % of them are sitting down. They look like they're all standing.
What's
that?
It's an exciting game.
Yeah. I'm just saying, right there, any number of them could be performing those toe lifts and strengthening those anterior tibials, right?
Yeah, except for this lady. This lady, she couldn't. You won't have problems trying to lift your toes on that one.
Yeah, no, she wouldn't really want to do that. Now, training the opposing muscles to an often recruited muscle serves a couple of benefits, or serves a couple of purposes. One is the benefit of lengthened strength in the performative muscle, right? So if you're always running, like you were saying earlier, John, always running, always jumping, always falling forward, and the angle between the top of the foot and the lower leg is as obtuse as that can be, right? Like it is just as far apart as it can.
Fancy term, plantar flexion.
Fancy term, plantar flexion. That's right. If you committed to the other fancy term, dorsiflexion, often enough, then that exact thing isn't an uncommon environment for that calf to encounter, for that Achilles tendon to encounter. It's not like plenty of people can't express that level of acuteness.
I could have had a V8 this morning. You have no idea what just hit me. So I see this all the time when I'm working with clients in dead bugs. So very basic core exercise where one's laying down on their back, drawn into their navel, opposite arm, opposite leg, lengthening out and extending. Now, this is one of those things where you can take a good exercise and make it just a little bit better. And to this point, right, pulling your toes towards your knee anytime that you're working on like some floor work is some sprinkles on the cake to just take that exercise to that next level, because you'll get a chance to really activate and work into those ATIBs, or at least if nothing else. So you've been talking about this kind of conscious or subconscious engagement. You can at least take a moment to be consciously engaged with your ankles, with those ATIBs, and just put a little tension, pulling them towards you. Go into your exercise, and halfway through the exercise, you'll go back to where your toes are just kind of flopping there, and then you go, God damn it, and pull them back towards you and try it again. But as you do that more and more, you'll develop that strength, you'll develop that better awareness, and again, minimize potential for these kind of opportunities of injury. Because, these are those, again, this always think of when I first started working with you talking about injuries. There's contact injuries where a body comes into your body and alters where your joints are in space, because no two pieces of matter can occupy the same space at the same time.
External influence, yeah.
So you think about like football, whether it be NFL or soccer, right? And someone comes in from a side and tackles you, and your knee gets displaced from going this way, and all of a sudden it's going this way, right? That's an injury that you recover from. You do some rehab, and often you go. His injury, right? This is more of again of a habituation that he's already had, so he'll have to go through the recovery process, but then even more so, he'll need to make sure to rehabilitate that whole hip, even to some degree, of how it incorporates movement to minimize this potential again. Because it happens once, unfortunately, it's that kind of rule of it can happen again kind of a thing.
Yeah. Now we're highlighting a lot with regard to ankle mobility, and that is really something that deserves a lot of attention. However, the premises that we've been discussing with regard to this to that injury are the same no matter what. Like anything that you can move voluntarily, you likely have some way to perform the exact opposite expression voluntarily. What I mean by that is that it's not really likely that I'm going to pick up a glass to drink my water out of it, and that's it. I can't perform any action that's going to allow me to set it down, and so instead, I just have to wait for the whatever the lifting mechanism is to slowly fatigue, so that it gradually lowers down, right? Or I just let the shit drop, right? And I don't want to do either one of those things, so I perform a controlled agreement between with opposing muscle groups that enables me to put something up and drink out of it and then set it down. Now, there's a lot that goes into some of those agreements and not a lot that goes into others. It's a really clear distinction when you deal with something that has muscles that sit on the side of a hinge, kind of a hinge type joint, versus muscles that sit around those of a swivel type joint, right? Hinge, open, close, open, close. Swivel, something in, it has far greater the number of expressions that are far greater, and that seems more complicated, but it's only more complicated in terms of identifying which muscles are participating in the agreements. It's not any more complicated with regard to the premise that something is governing and something is balancing, right? Something is executing the movement, something is balancing the movement. It really is no more complicated. It's just more complicated with a joint that has a greater range of motion, finding which muscles are in disagreement when you have a persistent injury.
Now, how did you go about that for your shoulder recovery? Because you've had two slap tears, correct? Or are they not classified?
Well, unclassified, way back when, rotator cuff tears. And so, so for me, it was a series, for me, PT was, first, let me say, on behalf of myself and on, with Range Fitness Online as a whole, there are millions of super qualified PTs in this country, in the United States and in the world over. Really qualified, really, really insightful, really dynamic, right? Plus, we also have to understand that we can only do as much as we can either conceptualize or research. And back when I had these injuries, one of them was before the internet, and another one, another one, right? And another, stone tablet kind of shit. And then the other one happened. When you could, we talk about doom scrolling.
When Prometheus came down with the fire?
Pretty much. Anyway, so the other one was when you got to a web page and there weren't pages and there weren't slick carousels of information, all that. You could just endlessly scroll on the same page and the background didn't move, kind of shit. So there wasn't a whole lot of, and that points to how little data was available, right? Like for just general consumption. So when we look at that, at those two things, and we say, well, I was dissatisfied with the help I was getting. I had a very limited scope of exposure. So what, I was taken through some age old shoulder rehab, both times. And like, interestingly, when they happened a couple of years apart, both times given the same exercises to do, even though they were for different things. So, in the case where I had my, I had on my right side, whenever I'd go to make some kind of a movement this way or this way, and it really hurt, or when I would go to reach behind me, it would really hurt. I'm sorry, on that side. I, beginning to realize that, my arm getting taken like this and pulled and getting thrown to the ground, and that's what protracted my shoulder blade around the side of my body, and then the resulting injuries. Realizing that those exercises didn't counteract that movement at all, right? Like, put your hand on the wall and then crawl your fingers up. Then put your hand on the wall, crawl your fingers up, and then do some light and gentle squats, keeping your hand where it is. Push against the wall, wrap a towel around a column, and then pull with it, or all of that shit. Our standard exercises, and they are standardized for a reason, and in a lot of cases they apply, but in some cases they don't. And the reasons that it might or might not apply are many and varied, and we're not going to go into all that. However, for me, it was realizing that if something hurt and it felt knotted, right, it felt like it just did not want to move or let go, so pressing on it and then committing to this action, to whatever action brought me pain, realizing that I was in less pain, and then going about figuring out what the limitation was by figuring out what couldn't perform and what performed the opposite action. Mm-hmm. If it hurt to do like this, then why didn't it hurt to do like this, right. For instance, right? So going about those things and focusing on them, and abandoning the exercise suggestions that were many from PT. Again, not that they don't work. They just weren't the speediest form of recovery for me.
Well, not to take it into a tangent too far off, but how, it comes down to, I feel to some degree, is how do you serve the most populace? And I think a lot of times it's that common denominator mentality. And so unfortunately, if you're, having to churn out a whole bunch of people, not because you want to, but because you have to, whether it's just a volume issue or a business issue, whichever way it is, right? You're going to use that what I think of as the Pareto method. And you're going to use, 80% of your, what fixes about 80% of people's shit. And that's what we're going to give to everybody. And that 20%, well, either they'll come back around and we'll be able to help them out, or, they never kind of get help, or they find range fitness.
Well, that's right. In popularized relief structures, I'd even say that the 80-20 principle applies to 20% of the available exercises probably solve 80% of the available problems, right? Yep. And when you flip that and you go, so 80% of the available exercises only apply to 20% of the injuries. Mm-hmm. Maybe, right? I mean, you could fudge those ratios a bit, I'm sure, but the fact is that relationships between muscles, performative muscles, are often unexplored as a methodology for pain relief, and it really, really, really is a disservice to those of us who have the time on our hands to perform these repetitive exercises, because often those repetitive, those restorative expressions really don't require much.
No.
They don't require a whole lot. It's just a few minutes a day, right?
I know that this is the two fitness guys saying it's just a few minutes a day to do some exercises, but in truth, you've already kind of mentioned it with the NBA crowd, right? If you're having some ankle or heel pain, or you need to work on your dorsiflexion, right? There's no reason why you're standing in line at Starbucks, or you're waiting on the boss to finish up with his business call, so you're waiting outside the boss's door, wherever it is. You can do these little toe lifts, right? The one I did for myself was I really focused on a proper hip hinge when I fed and watered my dog. Right. And so I got away. I didn't have to do this 15 to 30 minute workout, so to speak, of these isolated exercises, but I had at least 4 times a day when I had to feed and water him with 2 different bowls, that I had to hip hinge on my one injured leg and lift up and really challenge it through those ranges of motion. And kind of to your point, right, is I use that sense of, okay, when I started hinging, I hit kind of what I call the pain cave. I always think of Star Wars and Darth Vader and Luke, and we know what's in the cave. We don't need to find out what's in the cave, right? We just go up to the threshold, hi Darth, and then we leave. We don't need to go in. But hinge into it, sense that, and then again work on using those muscles, like you said. What pulled me down here is one effort, but now use the other muscles to oppose and get myself back up and out of there. And then that next thing, like I've said before, I was picking my shoes up that way. If there's trash on the floor, I started picking. It became a little bit of a game for me. And then when I had to go work out, I'd already done a couple hundred reps of this single leg hinge without really changing my life too much.
So in the case of any prohibitive expression, right? Some kind of injury, or some kind of expression that is causing you pain, and you feel an injury during a portion of a movement, or during any portion of a movement, right? So like it's only when I lift my elbow up this high, or it's only when I do this much, or it's when does it hurt? When I move it from here. When I move it from here, it hurts. In either one of those expressions, the kind of the fundamental roadblock that we all hit, if we can afford to and have the time to go to a PT appointment, that kind of thing, is that we encounter the communicated necessity to do this block of activities that require dedicated space. Like, and I don't mean like with all kinds of fancy equipment, although sometimes even that's unrealistic. Right. I mean, someone hands you a book, like a Bible-sized book of exercises that you need to perform. They tell you need to perform them 2 or 3 times a day, all of them, and each one of these things is an hour and a half long. And when you protest, you get asked the question, well, how important is your recovery to you? You do them as often as your recovery is important to you. Whereas in many, many, many cases, not all of them by a long shot, but in many cases, recovery can happen during times that you are doing things that you would do anyway.
Right.
Especially because you do those repetitiously.
Yeah.
So for instance, if the answer is when you walk, perform your stride in this manner. It's tiring. You won't be able to do it for long. You'll have to take more frequent breaks, whatever, but you do it all the time. So you have the opportunity for rehabilitation all the time. And the smaller the steps that you take to implement it, the better off you'll be.
Right.
Or if you're standing in line somewhere and you need to work on your anterior tibial expressions, and you just practice on lifting your feet 1 millimeter, the balls of your feet 1 millimeter off the ground, like that if you're wearing shoes, the bottom of the shoe doesn't even leave the floor. Your foot just presses up against the top of the shoe. Even that done the whole time that you're standing in line, that's a significant contribution to your rehabilitation or your rehabilitation.
Right.
In the case of your shoulder, shoulder being a swivel joint, let's look at some of the things that we often talk about or we often hear about.
Well, do you want to bring back these videos as well, or did you?
Yeah, let's call up those videos.
You can keep on
rambling.
Ramble on.
Love that song.
It's a great one. It's a great band.
Sacrificed a lot of mental capacity to that song.
Well, you know, worst things in life.
All right. So let's go back to the very beginning of that. Just to the very beginning. So
you want me to unmute
if we look, sure, yeah, mute it.
But you want this one muted?
No, mute it. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, if we play it just kind of frame by frame. Now, first, I want to say this athlete is obviously putting in the work. Okay. Nothing against this person at all. Now, 1,037 days as of the time of this recording for a shoulder injury. If you look right here,
3 years, right?
Right. If you look right here, even when the cover comes off, right, and this arm goes behind for counterbalance, right, like just counterbalancing, the way that this palm on the non-performing arm, go ahead. Right there. There's all this presentation of a lot of anterior expression, really, really powerfully built pecs, right? Mm-hmm. Which is going to predispose alignment and execution for recruited muscles. Now, right there, that was a perfect example. If we look at this expression, there is some significant concavity to the chest. Right? Those pecs are really drawn in. And if you go, well, it's a resting position, you don't know shit, whatever. Sure, fine, wonderful. You're probably right. But there's also the possibility that when you go to perform the squat, let's also call to mind this person's, just as a side note, this person's anterior tibial expression and how that's also not very strong in comparison to their calf. Because those heels, they're in a squatted position. Those heels are not on the floor, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying the anterior tibials aren't strong on this individual. I'm just saying they don't possess the kind of counterbalancing strength that they could with regard to the strength in this person in Natalie Allport's calves. Anyway, rolling forward now. The concavity that's there in the chest.
Here, you know, I really work for myself, and I even tease clients, right, to try to rest with these shoulders gently pulled back in some regards. Mm-hmm. Just somewhat mindful of this. And now, and who knows with she's a competitor of some sort, so maybe this is just after she went balls to the walls on a competition. And in that regard, it's like, okay, so be it. But again, if I was her coach, right, I'd say lay on your back. Mm-hmm. Right, lay on your back, let your shoulders fall flat to the floor, or find a wall to lean up against with your arms overhead, where again you get a chance to not collapse your rib cage here. Right, as we're in this rounded, we're collapsing into our ribs, we're minimizing how much air we can get in. You're again, because of if it's fatigue based here and we're in this collapsed position, you may be at a high propensity to when you come out of there to actually have a spasm that doesn't want to let go, in which you may end up with some sort of ice pick pain back in the shoulder blades or even in the neck somewhere. Right. In high school football, we called them stingers, but all it was, clavicle collapsed into your shoulder collapsed into your clavicle, and this ice pick pain of your shoulder blade trying to rip off your spine, but I digress.
Well, all of these things that you talked about are life impacts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like those are things that occur outside of this activity. And they're valid and they should be paid attention to. It is direct evidence for a great many things. I would venture or I would hazard a guess to say that this person, if they were to lay on their back and take their arms in this kind of cactus arm expression, that those wrists would be sitting really high off the floor, like really high. Now, in this representation that we have here on the screen, with that concavity in the shoulders and those elbows are used to being winged out, the chest is used to being drawn, the shoulders are used to being drawn. It points to a lot of forward based expression. So that is going to inform and bias how this person moves their arms in every other expression, whether or not it's a shoulder exercise or what have you. An overhead press, for instance, will end up recruiting more of the pec rather than any other focus group.
Mm-hmm.
Any kind of a posterior delt movement, for instance, like when she was doing the posterior delt movement, there was this tilt and this compensation so that the rhomboid and some portion of the trap, but the rhomboid and the infraspinatus and those other pulling structures would get involved that way, which are important for shoulder health, sure, right? Mm-hmm. But the compensatory efforts with regard to those default biases need to be addressed, and if they are not, that recovery, it's 3 years in recovery.
Yeah.
Right. That is a long time to spend recovering on a soft tissue injury.
I mean, if it was a full tear, I could see, depending on what the injury is. Now, that's one thing we didn't investigate per se. Right now, if this is a full blown tear where she had some sort of surgery repair, like I could see 3 years, but that's a very diligent and very still, I think, slow process. It should take maybe if a more conservative measures, maybe a year and a half, 2 at most, maybe. But then, like 3 years feels like either there's some re-injury occurring or we never really rooted out the culprit, and so we're just kind of limping along the whole time, as it were.
Well, as you pointed out in our last session, we need to take some things into account when we're performing any movement that we feel is less than when performing other movements, right? Mm-hmm. So like I feel really confident when I'm doing a front raise in my shoulders, but I don't feel nearly as confident when I'm doing a lateral or some kind of posterior delt effort. The thing that we have to remember is that, as you pointed out last time, when you are moving something, when you're performing a loaded expression, you are moving the object that you were trying to move. You're moving the weight of your limb or body that is participating in the move, and you are fighting against, or potentially fighting against, the reluctance for an uncommon expression in an opposing muscle. So if you are really, really bicep heavy, I see this a lot in servers, for instance, like people who work in the restaurant industry, who do a lot of this, who either do the shoulder carry for trays or the chest, or the chest height carry, right? Whenever they do this, they typically find that if they have to do something where their arms are extended, there's a lot of pain. And I was working out, and when I was doing these tricep extensions, man, it really hurt. My elbow really hurts. I have heard that exact thing so many times. I mean, I was at jiu-jitsu
this weekend and rolling with a guy, and after we got done, he was complaining about his elbow hurting, and it was brachialis bicep shit. It was just kind of put the hand of God on him and.
Hand of God. That's funny because like when I like dig into something, I call it the hellbow. Anyway, right. So so you have to remember if you have an abundantly recruited in a certain expression muscle, it will be highly reluctant to move into a different expression. So if I have a tricep that sits in a lengthened position and a bicep that sits and a brachialis that sits in shortened position and they're always loaded.
Right.
Whenever I go to perform the opposite action, this isn't going to want to lengthen. And because it's not going to want to lengthen, this is going to have to work extra hard. And it's going to feel like there's something wrong.
And I would add a second layer to this potentially, and maybe it's kind of already enveloped in what you were talking about it, but there's that even a neurological connection, almost like you forget, so to speak, how to extend your elbow. And because that bicep doesn't want to let go, it's not that you're going to atrophy. I mean, it would take a while for you to actually atrophy.
Yeah.
But that neurological connection, again, this could be like you got a desk job and you've been doing the same desk job for about 5 or 6 years, right? That's about that time frame. Some of this stuff could really start flaring up, in that you've been in these kind of bent elbow positions, and then you've never really had to extend that arm. And so that time you actually have to, you get that big acute pain, or something just goes pop if you overload it too much. But we're always training our body.
Yeah.
That's something that really was a big change for me when I started thinking of movement as a skill. Like to get really nerdy and vulnerable. Not Baldur's Gate, Elder Scroll. Like, I thought that was the coolest thing when I was just running around and all of a sudden, like, you got skill points for running, or you would jump and then you would get skill points for jumping. Like, it was the weirdest thing to me in a video game. But that's actually really how it is for us in life. And if you want to think about that, if you allow yourself to go to that fantasia, when we pick something up, whether it's in the gym or at the grocery store or in the kids' room or in the dog pen, whatever, right? How we engage our shoulders, how we hip hinge, like that is going to dictate everything else. Like it's a ripple effect almost. And the more pristine you can practice these things, or take moments like we were highlighting earlier to, if you're in the line working on your toe lifts, to again build up those things, you're developing that skill. And that's truly, in my mind, how you bulletproof your shoulders, or you bulletproof your elbows. Is you got grocery sacks in the car? Well, we just don't grab them and collapse into the chest. Right? We treat them like a farmer's carry. We set our shoulders, get everything tight, grab the groceries, and then carry them in. Right? You're talking about picking up the suitcase. Yeah, sure, you could probably whip it up, and that ain't no thing. But can you, again, hip hinge a little bit, or use your whole body versus this weird. I was using we have this little handheld food processor, got a little ripcord on it. And so I was there yesterday. I was holding it, and set my shoulder. I went and just ganking that sucker with my lat. Right. Like, yeah, I'm dopey. I'm taking that a little bit too an extreme. My wife was like closing her ears, saying, "You're just making too much noise."
So this is a manually operated food processor.
Manual operated food processor. It's like pulled like a lawnmower.
That has a tension cord.
Yeah.
And some kind of spring mechanism that okay. All right. John, I have a question for you.
Yeah, I am a nerd.
Daddy, can I draw?
Can you draw? I thought I gave you permission.
No, you did, but when you exited out of the one thing and went on to this one, it took it away.
I suppose we'll let you annotate.
So one thing I wanted to comment on here in relation to what we were discussing earlier with this athlete, I want to make it clear, I am not shitting on Natalie Allport at all. But this person is exhibiting no greater bias toward anything else than anyone else. They've obviously put in a lot of work and effort, and they are not doing anything different than many other people. There's a lot of resilience present in how they're choosing to approach. I mean, 3 years, how many of us would give up after 3 years? How many of us would give up on our rehab after 1 year and say that is just, okay, well, I guess it's just our lot in life to live with it. Mm-hmm. That's the equivalent of this person found like like a leaky faucet and determined they absolutely would not stop until that faucet was fixed, right? Yep. And how many of us would have just said, well, after 1,300 times of trying to fix it, well, I guess it's just my lot in life to live with a leaky faucet, right? Now, having said all that, calling to mind some very specific expressions. You know, we talked just a moment ago about the concavity in the chest. Now, if we look here on the left side, we can see where this shoulder is situated. And we can see opposed to that where the elbow is situated. Now, let's look at how that right hand is, or that right arm is positioned. Very, very little grip, very little fingertip expression here on the bar, right?
Yeah, that pinky.
Very little. Yeah, very little purchase, and it looks like more purchase on the left side.
Yes,
however,
much more.
Yeah, if we look at the elbow presentation and how far forward that one is versus how recessed this one is, it's not like this one is like close to this sliding door over here.
How high each elbow is when you say
I'm
recessed?
talking about with shoulder protraction driving that right elbow forward, right? That left shoulder is doing a better job at retracting, and that right shoulder is doing a fantastic job at protracting. Now, that being the case, right, it's gonna really cause a flattening of the shoulder blade, and so therefore against the rib cage, and therefore a real reduction in capability for posterior stability in the positioning the shoulder in a stable expression during a significantly loaded movement. I mean,
that's no change,
right? Yeah, that weight is not nothing.
45-pound plate, so 225 plus. If I'm reading that properly.
Yeah. God, 245-pound plate. Yeah.
225 front, and I'm guessing she cleaned that off the ground.
Yeah. So,
God damn.
Not looking at form and how you could improve this or that or whatever. I'm talking specifically about shoulder stability. The left side is in a far better position to remain stable than the right one.
Now, to hijack you here for a second. Right. Another way for you to know this is happening or not, because you can't tell where your shoulders are, will be your grip. That's always a telltale. Like anybody you see doing front rack squats and they're doing kind of like the Frankenstein, right? It's because they don't have the shoulder mobility and they're bypassing it to work on quad development or something of that nature. You're not going to throw shade at that one right now, but that sense. So, and I have the same thing when I'm working my back squat. I notice is again, because my right shoulder, I was talking with Paul about earlier, giving me some issues as far as position. And I'm noticing it when I'm videotaping myself that things aren't lining up to kind of what we're seeing in her video. And so to me, it's not creating pain, but I know it can go down that path. So I'm trying to get ahead of it. All that to be said is when I'm doing back squat and I'm getting underneath the bar, right, I can feel how maybe one hand's trying to shift differently, and it's shifting differently because of the forces being put on it from my shoulder, because my shoulder's trying to do something different to allow me to push myself underneath that bar in that way.
So while we're on the subject, John, one of the things I appreciate about you the most with regard to how you work with your clients, it's just your signature scent, John. You just smell so good. One of the things I appreciate about you the most when working with your clients is how when they show bias toward a performative effort, like, a muscle is overacting in a specific environment or expression, you will have them do rebalancing exercises and then go into the movement, right? So you'll say, oh, we're going to reposition that. How would you coach Natalie here on just only not the movement as a whole, but only repositioning this shoulder so that before they go into the movement, there is some real stability?
So I guess the first thing would be, kind of wanting to know if what we're feeling and where we're feeling it, if there is any pains, restrictions, just what's our sensory feedback coming to us right there. Again, taking it back to me with like for mine on the back squat is, I instantly not just notice the shift in my hand, but I'll notice all of a sudden maybe feels like all of the load is sitting in my hand. Or all of a sudden I feel all the weight of the bar just sitting on my right shoulder. But when I have everything properly and engaged in a good space, then I feel just the weight on me, sure, but it's not this, again, acuteness to it. So again, taking it back to Natalie here, again, what are we noticing? What are we feeling? Is it just like this extreme acuteness in your hand as the weight's peeling your hand back? Is it, we're feeling maybe something in the elbow, something pinching or crankiness in the elbow just as we maintain this position? Or do we not noticing anything, right? And if that's the case, and that's fine, right? But gather that information first, because that's going to be helping us piece together kind of where we want to look at and go after this. Knee jerk, though, would be, again, looking at some stuff like maybe doing a quick palpation in between sets of like subclavius underneath the, not subclavius, subclavicle, so underneath your collarbone.
Subscapularis,
sorry. No, not subscap.
No, subscap. That is, yeah, that's correct.
Working a little bit.
You are correct, sir.
Maybe even coming into pec minor again, and depending on what you're doing, 225. She probably having about a 60-second to 90-second rest break, I would assume. And so just doing some gentle palpation is that for, again, 30 to 60 seconds, and then even maybe some light band pull aparts, or just using her arm weight and working on that scapular retraction and that connection between her shoulder blades, working on maybe that little sense of her sternum lifting and just priming. I always think of it as the old time engines where you get out in front and you got to put a little crankshaft in and you got in some sense, right? They even use the term, what's it called? Motor units in our muscles is the kind of one of the anatomy terms. All right, so we get these motor units kind of firing and then going back into the lift. Now, other things I might suggest or try to, depend on what we're working on and where she's at and what we're progressing towards, is right stripping some of the weight down and then trying again and seeing, is it a load issue, right? So, right, can we get to the position without load and then build from there would be the other strategy to play with.
Okay.
How would you how would you add or alter into that?
Well, so knee jerk here, right? Just going off of what I'm seeing here. Like if I'm just acting like it's a post you see on some forum or something, right, I would encourage someone in this same kind of expression to, before each set, to perform a couple of biasing exercises,
right?
So that there is an automatic tendency, albeit temporarily, toward correct stability. So, for instance, what I would do is I would have her or this person, I would have them like hold your arm up in front of you, upper arm at a 90-degree angle from the chest or the spine, lower arm at a 90-degree angle from the upper arm. And then I would have her externally rotate the wrist or the forearm and then move that back and forward. Take the elbow back and then take the elbow to in line with the shoulder. And I would just have them work like that.
Right.
Right. Now that angle the whole time needs to stay
the same.
Right. The tendency for this person and any other person with this same kind of presentation will be this. Number one, this will be a struggle. It'll be like this, like, do it more. I can't, this will be a struggle. But like, let's say it gets to this, where the wrist is slightly behind the presentation of the elbow. Once they start to bring this back, that elbow will, that wrist will be almost like there's an axle right there, and it's just bringing this back this way, right? So you really have to stay conscious of that performative from there to there. The other thing that I would have them do is once this was performed, is to reach back and then pull down like you're trying to drag the elbow forward of the chest, of the rib cage, right? And then once you go to do that, you would be amazed at how temporarily, how much more correctly set that activity would be. That would be one thing. Let's
I like that.
We have,
again, especially if you're not in pain, right? If there's no pain with the movement, yeah, I think that's excellent to do things of that nature, or find those that's where corrective exercises I think really shine. And again, that sense of using them as a little crank start for the movement pattern. And then if you really wanted to spice it up, so to speak, right, you could use this as supersetting. So you can even find ways of using this as a part of your workout to where you have that bias, so you make it as a 30 seconds or 60 seconds before of doing that corrective exercise, and then hopping immediately into your exercise. Make that part of your routine versus just doing strict sets of the exercise.
I do want to comment on that, right? And what the correctives that were just demonstrated are unloaded.
Right.
They are just your ability to move against yourself. You'll have a tendency to implement like tools in it, right? Many times, not all the time, but many times when you implement tools in a corrective exercise, you will invite compensation, right? Because you can't move that limb or whatever adequately on its own. What's that?
Why is that?
Right, because you can't move it correctly on its own, so you start to produce other shit. It's sort of like if you want to do a strict front raise, right? Let's say for shoulder development. So you want to do a strict front raise, and you have this going on like this, and then you can't quite get the weight up there. We do this all the time in weightlifting. We do it safely. There's plenty of evidence and benefit in a cheat rep and all that other stuff once you've reached a certain level of fatigue. And you're going to help yourself complete the rep, right, to get through a portion of weakness. Great, fine, right? As long as everything is conscious and everything is controlled and everything is done skillfully, no danger.
And I would say,
but when you start on, what's that?
And not having any presence of pain.
And not having any pain, right? Well, that one.
I know, but
I shouldn't feel like that went without saying.
Deep water, but people do.
Right. So I'm going to do this front raise, and when I go to do this front raise, right, this hurts or it's too much weight. So what I end up doing is kind of is using other parts of my body, right? Whereas if I can't raise my arm up without taking my elbow out unloaded, I need to work on that. I need to work on that expression first.
Right.
You get someone with this kind of shoulder mobility, as we see referenced here, to do this, and I guarantee you, if this metric is keeping the elbow in front of its respective shoulder and rotating that wrist outside, then what you're going to see is either the elbow moving out to make it happen, or the body tilting to make it seem like more is occurring than is. We will see this is a very short video, so we will see in some of the snippets that go on some of her rehab exercises, where she is using tools and using adaptations. Here's just performative stuff, right? See how that rib cage was lifting on that one? Oh, right. As soon as she was trying to go up in it, how the rib cage started lifting, right? These other compensations with things that don't contribute to shoulder stability. They contribute to body stability, right? Now, not saying that she's not noticing progress. Obviously, this person's noticing progress and able to perform more often. But even that compensation of crunching into one side to get this lift happening, that's not doing anything for the shoulder mobility.
Right.
You could perform all that same shit, not doing those other adapted movements.
Well, it reminds me, like when I'm working with clients, that's one of the big things I always highlight when we're especially working, maybe call them yoga poses. but it's trying to be fluid and graceful through them and not using momentum or sudden impacts. Because effectively what's happening, like when we catch a ball falling in the air, right? If you go with the ball, it doesn't hurt your hand, right? But if you just stay rigid and the ball hits you in the hand, it might bounce out or whatever. Right? And so we try to find that weightless moment for our body, and we catch ourselves in a stronger position versus being able to take and lift to put ourselves through that range back and forth. And we kind of have to throw ourselves up and then catch ourselves in this moment of weightlessness, as it were, because it's too stressful for us to actually use the appropriate movement pattern at that time until we develop that strength. And again, I think that's to your point, right? We see a lot of that with these exercises she's doing, like a power clean or a clean and jerk, right? All of it. I mean, yes, shoulders required to like keep you connected, but once that weight's up, you're just moving your arm in a lot of cases around the weight and then locking everything in and catching it. Again, you're going to need some shoulder stability to be able to maintain and keep your arm overhead, but it's different, so to speak, than, again, on a power clean, you want that momentum and power, but if you're picking your luggage up, right? You don't necessarily want to have to feel like you got a power clean to get your goddamn suitcase overhead. I mean, it wouldn't be a bad habit or practice, but at the same time, right? You want to develop that fluid movement.
Even here in this still, right? You can see how that left arm is locked out. That right arm is not. Right? That right shoulder blade is expressed in a way that left shoulder blade isn't. Right? It's there's a disparity there. And there might be a lot of relief going on. I mean, doing all the movements that they were doing before the injury, great. All I'm saying is that the environment has not been resolved. The environment that invited the injury has not been resolved. The potential for injury is still there. You want to watch one more video, or do we want to go to the?
We'll get one
or do
more.
we want to? Okay, let's do one more.
Back in the game.
All right. Time to see a PT. Okay. Now, right there, we talked about these compensatory movements, right? A lot of chest lift and back arching in order to make the weight seem like it's lifting higher. If I'm holding my arms out like, right. And if I'm holding my arms out like this, right, and I just tilt, that's not doing anything for my rehabilitation. I'm not shitting on this person's efforts.
Right.
A lot of us leave that shit unresolved. I'm only saying that these are ways that we can go about facilitating a speedier and more long-lasting recovery, right? Paying attention to these things. Okay, let's go ahead. Okay, right there on that one. Right there. So see how those there's still the chest is lifted, the back is flat-ish, right? Is flat. This person, whenever they're going to do these, if we can have one more frame. So right there's a slight forward tilt of the shoulders, right? Which means that you're going to be working not the structures that if you put your hand right here on your shoulder blade, just put your hand right there and take your arm out like this. Whenever you move your arm, you'll feel these muscles act or not. Versus when I move my arm this way, or when I have my arm this way, very little occurs. Not nothing, but very little. So there's not really much in that movement that is catering toward either the muscle that was injured or the muscles that stabilize.
Yeah. I mean, right. To get even, I mean, it was me being more nitpicky. I also don't love how, we use the tools that we have for ourselves. I don't like having the face kind of creamed into the bench like that either.
I don't like that either.
Being a little ticky tacky in some degree. But if that's the case, I'd rather the client to stand up further to where their head would be up here more, to where you can have a more neutral cervical spine, as it were, or neutral head position.
Yeah, that chin becomes a point of load bearing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then we even start driving our face into it to some degree. So not a big fan of that.
Now, I will say, with regard to this person's positioning, the rule, the more the elbows sit away from the rib cage during pull movements, the more your shoulders are recruited. It's a difference between articulating the arm versus moving the shoulder blade, right? Those are different shit, does those two things. And so the injury that it seems like this person had is with articulation.
Right.
Not protraction, retraction of the shoulder blade. Anyway, so let's go ahead. One more thing to say. Concavity in the chest, right? One more thing to say. Quite often, we will encounter things. Well, I did these things, like with Natalie from our last one. Well, I did all that shit and it worked, right? I'm back to doing those movements, and that's fine. Great. It's not like the stuff that would be optimally benefited isn't worked in a secondary fashion.
Right.
I mean, it is, right? Like it absolutely is.
I know it sounds very distasteful, but in some ways I feel like it's kind of playing drunk darts. Right.
That's a great analogy, actually, right?
Be out the bar or the pub playing darts with your friends after having a couple of drinks, and you'll probably hit bullseye from time to time, but you're going to probably hit more of the wall or other things that you may not be targeting for. Versus if you just took the time, whether it was in your own garage and you set up the dartboard and you put the duct tape on the floor and you stepped out how far it needed to be, and you really just focused on making single throws to try to hit that bullseye, you'd have a lot more success over time honing that skill and that craft versus just kind of willy-nilly, as it were. Now, again, going to PT, I'm not saying that's willy-nilly, but again, when we're given a laundry list of exercises that don't, like, it needs to be a laser focus, a sniper's like crosshairs on what's happening. You can go about it in a general fashion, and you will occasionally lop off the high edges that are making things uneven and unsmooth for you. But you're also going to be building up burrs and divots that are going to keep the thing from being smooth. And so what I mean by that is, right, if she's having some sort of shoulder issues, yes, shoulder presses may be really good to work on that articulation. But if we're not doing anything to help with the concavity, if we're not doing anything that help with this rotation of the elbows inward, now we're maybe doing some better pressing motions, but again, we're still not really honing in that fullest benefit as you could have, I feel.
The way I look at it is, let's say you want to paint the side of a house, or you want to paint a patch, and you have a paint sprayer. You have a paint sprayer and you go over and you're going to paint the patch, right? But you're going to paint a lot of shit around the patch too.
Right.
Right. Whereas if you have a paint brush or one of those really, really little bitty sprayers, right? And you just go over the spot.
Yeah.
I mean, just barely go over the spot. When you're repairing a hole in a wall, if you've ever seen anybody repair a hole in a wall, it's not confined to just a 1-inch border around where that hole was. I mean, you would think that a hole that was like 9 times the size of that hole is what was originally there, right? So it's rehabilitation by battalion, right? There's just so much shit happening that those muscles can't help but experience recruitment. But what should be happening is correctly identified bias, and that just does not happen often enough. Okay, so yeah, that concavity in the chest that you were just talking about, right? On some reps, great. On other reps, not great.
Yeah, like here you see it. Here you kind of see with that kind of an effort.
I want to say, okay, so right, yeah, this is a very, very common shoulder exercise. Which unfortunately, if we go back to that one, can we go back to that wall thing? Pause it there. Unfortunately, what ends up happening is that becomes a chest expression, right? Yeah, it becomes a chest mobility thing rather than a retracted shoulder. And you can see here how her right shoulder blade is not retracted. It is
Well, you see the body twist.
You can see the body twist, right? So there's this. When and again, just saying that that it is not like John with John's term, laser focused, and that's really what we want to maintain.
Because
okay.
again, it goes back, not to cut. I know it's time to get out of here, but this again, where everything we do is a little bit of a rep and a building on this. And so even if you're going into PT and you're not doing these reps as pristine as you can, it means that when you try to do, like, you're picking up your grocery sacks or you're picking up the laundry basket, like, you're not going to have that good proprioception. You're not going to have that good awareness on where that shoulder needs to be. And so that's where it's a double-edged sword when we go to work out. If we go to working out and we think about it as, again, moving as a skill, and we're going to get better at learning this skill, we're going to get better at learning my body's positions as I move about space, then that builds and goes into other parts of our life to help ease all those aches and pains out. And then when something does flare up, again, we have a way of going back and identifying it. If we go to the gym and we're just moving things from point A to point B, if we're just trying to grit up a sweat, if we're going for completionist, we got our 10 set, we did our 3x10, or we did our 5x5, whatever it was, right? There's a lot left on the table in so much regards to your vitality and longevity and just your general ability to enjoy life in a lot of cases. Not to, again, be all curmudgeon about things.
All right. We hope that this has been a beneficial journey into some of the stuff that we can take control of when we're trying to rehabilitate not just shoulder injuries, but injuries as a whole, or predispositions or biases toward whatever is not allowing us to proceed or realize greater rewards. If you have any questions about anything, please absolutely feel free to drop us a line. You can do it here if you're watching while we're doing the stream. If you have a question, you can email us, rangefitnessonline.com. If you have any kind of a question about how to perform a movement or some specific pain that you're having, by all means, please reach out. We would love to help you. And if you don't mind, being on display for the world to see, all 18 people.
YouTube famous, baby.
Like YouTube famous. Then we can help document your progress on things and potentially help other people out as well. Don't be afraid to reach out. Your anonymity is yours. If you're concerned about it, we will never disclose anything. We might mention your case, but never your name and practice in reference. But if you have any questions, you are curious about anything, you can reach us on any one of our socials. We're here together once a week. John is here once a week on his own Thursday mornings at
5:30 a.m.
5:30 a.m. doing form checks and
right now just kind of reviewing my own form and talking about what's going on with my lifts. However, if you are curious, again, like you were saying about getting your own lifts checked or looked at, check out our subreddit. Feel free to put a post of your lift there. And if there's anybody in there besides my own, I'll take a look at them.
Right on. Okay. And in the meantime, you can reach us on any one of our other socials. You can visit us online, or you can visit our site at rangefitnessonline.com. And we are here on Twitch Tuesdays, US Central, 6:30 p.m. to whenever, usually 7:30, 8 o'clock. But until next time,
stay mindful as fuck, y'all.
And don't compensate. Sir John?
Be well, Sir Paul. Have a good night.
All right, man.
Chat,
You too. Take it easy.
Being here. Y'all be well.